Welcome to the Health Rant of the Week, episode 18. Hi, my name is Alejandro Flores, certified fitness and nutrition coach with Altus Fitness. Today's episode is titled Skinny Fat equals fat. All right, so first I want to refer to that term skinny fat. Skinny fat is a term that has been loosely used by people more often than not to disqualify or to make fun of someone that is close to them and whatnot, right? However, the skinny fat does have a meaning, right? So that meaning is basically, or it's not scientific just because, well, calling someone skinny fat, there's not much, science, anything in calling anyone that. However, there is a term it's a term that exists, all right? And when you call someone skinny fat, or what that refers to is a person that seemingly is in a normal weight, however, can have some of the complications and some of the symptoms, let's say, of an obese person, okay? So what's the most prevalent or the most significant one is visceral fat, okay? So visceral fat is the fat that is around the organs, and you don't necessarily have to have high subcutaneous fat, which is the fat that is like right under your tissue, your skin, is fat that will be inside of your torso and around your organs, which is actually the most dangerous one. I always tell my clients, like, when you unfortunately the fat that you see and that bothers you, and the one that you want to get rid of because it's the one that you see and like people just look at it and see or think it's ugly or whatever it is not necessarily the one that is going to kill you. The one that's going to kill you is the one that you can't see, the one that you can't pinch. That's what I tell them, the one that you can pinch. And a typical example is people that have those, whether it's big or not big. Sometimes it's people, like, as I said, going back to the skinny fat, people that are fairly skinny or fairly thin, so they have a good weight hip to waist ratio, they have a good body mass index, or an adequate body mass index, not being necessarily the most popular way of measuring anything these days, but I do think it's worth looking at in combination with other things. So when you have a body mass index that is a weight to height ratio, basically, that is appropriate, that will not reflect the fact that you could be skinny fat or that you could have like higher visceral fat. So that's why it is actually a very, very dangerous condition, because it's, when you talk about silent killers, it doesn't get any more silent killer than that, because it's very easy for someone to spot someone that is obese and to just kind of like deduct all the conditions that can come along with obesity. However, when you are someone that is in a normal weight, that is in an adequate body mass index, you may have some of the same risks, even though you're actually not a heavier person. And that's why I refer to, the skinny fat equals fat type of question, right? So I wanted to talk about a little bit about one condition. It's actually a syndrome. It's called the Metabolic Syndrome, and this is just food for thought, right? So I want you to understand why I am I'm daring to say, well, skinny fat may equal fat or even obese, because there have been studies done showing how there are metabolically healthy obese people, as in someone that has very high subcutaneous fat under the skin, all right, and they don't have fatty liver, for example, so they don't have a high visceral fat. So those people can live long and healthy lives. As much as I don't advocate for people just living their life like that, you do want to, even if not for vanity reasons, for other reasons, you want to make sure. Remember, we talked about before fat being an organ and being metabolically active as well, and increasing inflammation and some other conditions that are going to be derived from that. So even though you can be obese or high, very high body mass index, and you can be metabolically healthy, which is possible. It's not common, but it's possible and it does exist. I don't necessarily advocate for that. Now there's the more common one, which is the people that are obese and they are metabolically unhealthy, if you want to refer to them like that, which is people that have high subcutaneous fat and high visceral fat, high body mass index, and those are the ones that we kind of first think of every time we talk about obesity and all the complications. All right. Now there's the third kind of person, and I'm going to refer to Dr. Robert Lustig because he has been doing tons of research on this back in California, down in California, and he actually does have even MRIs showing people that fit the three descriptions. So I'm going to refer to him because he has taken it upon himself to basically just inform. There's lots of misleading information, especially coming from the medical establishment. So this guy has actually taken, there's some other people. There's I do like Dr. Ben Bickman. He's actually a PhD in chemistry. He's not an MD. I do like our Canadian, our own Jason Fung. Very, very, he has, for the last 16 years, he's been just making people healthy despite having type 2 diabetes and obesity and all that stuff. Dr. Perlmutter and all those guys. So, but I am going to specifically refer to Dr. Robert Lustig because he has done very specific testing on this specific syndrome. All right. Now, before we go there, I'm going to talk about, I'm going to go to Mayo Clinic's definition. I'm going to be referring to that. I'm going to be reading a little bit on that, but it's important because Mayo Clinic has been on the eye of the storm a couple times, in the sense that they have they're the ones that are attributed with the keto diet that has been used successfully to make so many people healthier, but at the same time they are the ones that it's the same, that basically come up with some definitions, and they keep pushing. Even though they developed and used the keto diet, they keep pushing the eat more fruits and vegetables and the first law thermodynamics and things like that as the be all and all, and all be all for you to stay healthier, which is not true. Okay, so metabolic syndrome is a cluster of conditions that occur together, increasing your risk of heart disease, stroke, and type 2 diabetes. These conditions include increased blood pressure, high blood sugar, excess body fat around the waist, and abnormal cholesterol and or triglyceride levels. Okay, so according to their stats, up to 1/3 of people in the U.S. have that, and I refer to the U.S. just because it's a good kind of market to study, I guess. But that doesn't mean that we in Canada don't have the same issues at a different degree. Not necessarily that much different, though. The Center for Disease Control actually concurs in that. It's about 30%. So they say, Mayo Clinic says 1/3. The CDC says that it's about 30%. So it's pretty much the same. Now, here is the trick. It says that one of the symptoms is a visible large waist circumference. Okay? Now, and that's where I'm going to come back here. Now, if you have metabolic syndrome and you don't have a large waist circumference, could you have type 2 diabetes? The answer is yes. Could you have heart disease? The answer is yes. Could you have autoimmune disease? The answer is yes. All right? So now, but let's just refer specifically to the markers of metabolic syndrome. Could you have high blood pressure? Absolutely yes. I have tested it myself. I have a blood pressure cuff or monitor that I take to my clients. I use them with specific clients, not everyone, but I do when I suspect there's something like that. Could you have high blood sugar? Absolutely yes. I've had clients that have the type 2 diabetes even though they have normal like a normal shape and all that stuff. So absolutely yes. Could you have excess body fat around your waist? No, not necessarily. Because what happens here is that you have a high visceral fat, but that high visceral fat does not necessarily reflect in a high circumference. You have like I had a client once that he had a super tight, small belly, almost unnoticeable. You saw him with a shirt, you could not tell, and that guy ended up being diagnosed with an autoimmune disease, right? So the high inflammation, high visceral fat would show in the scanner, but the BMI was always fine. So the body mass index was always fine. So this is a word of caution, and that's why I want you to understand, and this is where Dr. Lustig is very emphatic, and he says, is metabolic syndrome, is obesity a cause of metabolic syndrome, or metabolic syndrome a cause of obesity? Okay, because obesity, according to him and his studies, obesity does not cause metabolic syndrome. Metabolic syndrome may cause obesity. Remember what I referred to in the beginning. So he has tested people that have high circumference, high visceral fat, high circumference, low visceral fat, and low waist circumference, and high visceral fat. And guess what? Those people with low body mass index, low waist to hip ratio, they do have all the other symptoms except the large circumference of metabolic syndrome. So does that mean they don't have metabolic syndrome because they do not have a large waist circumference? Or does it mean that since they have most of the fat around the organs, around like fatty, like non-alcoholic fatty liver, and excess fat around like the pancreas, the liver, compromised beta cells and things like that, then they do have the metabolic syndrome, even though they do not have a high or visible body fat. All right? So think about this. This is one of those things that it's very confusing, and I almost think it's meant to confuse people, right? So once again, I went to random sites, like sponsored by different medical institutions out there and doctors and stuff, and they keep saying the same thing. So watch your weight, eat more fruits and vegetables, move more. Listen, one of the people that I was able to prove that had metabolic syndrome, because he had like textbook all the little boxes checked. That guy had a normal waist circumference. He had a normal body mass index, height to weight ratio. He had a normal one, and that guy was shortly after, as I expected. He was actually diagnosed with, not metabolic syndrome. That is something that was pretty obvious to someone that knows what they're looking for. But he was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease, right? So again, it's autoimmune disease, inflammation, they're like almost synonymous. So these are things that I want you to be cautious about. The information that is being put out there, even by some of the entities that you would go to in order to find answers, is not necessarily very accurate. And by no means am I saying that they don't know what they're talking about. What I say is that I don't think it's a coincidence that information is actually being widely distributed, even though there's like a big gray area, or it can be misleading. So yes, your skinny fat meaning you have high, and there are ways for you to test that. For one, it's very important that you keep your senses open for high blood pressure, high blood sugar. That's something that you can, with a blood glucose meters, you can get those even for free, as long as you can buy the strips or whatever it is. So you can test your blood sugar in the morning and see if it's like high all the time. Excess body fat around the waist, maybe not. Okay, you have a small, like a very, very hard abdomen. that doesn't jiggle. It doesn't jiggle. You don't have a big belly. It doesn't jiggle. But it's like very hard. Even though it's soft on the outside, you may, right? So abnormal cholesterol and triglycerides. Can you have that even if you're thin? Absolutely, you can. So are those like triggers for things like type 2 diabetes, heart disease? Absolutely. Those are some of the causes say metabolic syndrome is closely linked to overweight or obesity and inactivity. Yes or no? Like as I said, there are very conclusive studies that show that some people have metabolic syndrome even though they are very, very, very thin in the outside and they have very low subcutaneous fat and they have all the other markers. Are they not? Do they not have metabolic syndrome? Or is it that maybe one of the indicators or the markers here, which is the hip to waist ratio, is not necessarily what you're looking for? So that's just food for thought. Now, insulin resistance, right? So can you have, and what's insulin resistance? It says cells that don't respond normally to insulin and glucose can enter the cells as easily. All right, so can you have insulin resistance if you are skinny fat? Absolutely. I've met people like that have even type 2 diabetes, being very thin on the outside, but they have, like that tight, hard, inflamed, chronically inflamed abdomen. So please beware. Some of the risk factors says here, this is the Mayo Clinic once again, age, ethnicity, obesity, or diabetes. Now, isn't this a little contradicting? So if obesity is a cause of metabolic syndrome, so does metabolic syndrome cause obesity or obesity cause metabolic syndrome, right? Some of the complications are type 2 diabetes or heart disease, basically. Okay, now going back to the beginning, can you be skinny fat and have like normal body mass index? Yes. Yeah. Can you have normal hip to waist ratio? Yes. Can you have high HDL, so high bad cholesterol? There's no such thing, but bad cholesterol. Yes, you can. Can you have high triglycerides? Yes, you can. So if your levels of HbA1c are high, that means that over the last 90 days you've had like high triglycerides in your blood. There's your proof right there, right? So that you can have that. So you can have all the other symptoms. Waist to hip ratio, normal. BMI, normal. HDL, maybe high. Triglycerides, high. Blood pressure, high. Insulin resistant, you can have very well insulin resistance, or you can have like full-blown diabetes. So this is what I'm trying to say. And I know people out there that almost laugh at this thing and thinking like, oh, come on, I mean, that there's no such thing. It's just a myth, like skinny fat is just a myth. And, and I can eat. Have you ever, you've heard of even parents referring to their kids, oh, my kid can eat whatever he wants and he will not get, overweight. For one, we do have hormonal changes throughout our life. And this is something that I always caution people about, is we do have drastic every decade, but we have constant, for better or worse. So you can optimize or you can mess up your hormonal profiles throughout your life. So they will change. And the fact that someone right now in their 20s or even early 30s can eat whatever they want and pull it off, number one, doesn't mean that that's going to change. That's not going to change. It can change. Trust me, it can. I've seen it. Number two, that doesn't mean that that person is healthy or will be healthy with those bad habits, okay? So I want you to be very, very careful with that, okay? Skinny fat, potential for all the other or all the risks that an obese person can have, all right? The tricky part is it's very hard for you to determine. If you have any of the markers for metabolic syndrome, there's a pretty good chance that there's high visceral fat and that you're going to go down this path. So please, this is once again me trying to help you navigate through the misleading information out there. Sometimes the information comes from what we think is the right source, but sometimes the intent is not, to make you healthier. And I want to make sure that, again, I will refer to some of these, like hospitals, entities, or like government offices, whatever it is, for all the right reasons, sometimes for some of the wrong reasons. As I said, it's the same, hospital or institution that was attributed with one of the single best, healthiest, nutritional protocols out there is also attributed with, like bringing out confusing information on things that will pertain your health and will actually make a difference in your health and your longevity and your quality of life. All right, so thank you very much once again. Alejandro Fleury, certified fitness trainer and nutrition coach with Altus Fitness. I'll see you next week for another episode.